Hi everyone, this is Jesse Morgan with Minneapolis Public Schools presenting to you today on our experience with Read and Write by Texthelp. So my name is Jesse Morgan. I'm an occupational therapist and assistive technology professional. I'm the lead staff at the Minneapolis Public Schools Assistive Technology Center, or ATC. I'm an assistive technology professional. I'm on the Universal Design for Learning leadership team for Minneapolis Public Schools, and I'm part of the Minnesota Department of Education Assistive Technology State Leadership Team. I'm from Minneapolis. I am a graduate of Minneapolis Public Schools. I have two wonderful children attending Minneapolis Public Schools, and my favorite things to do are spend time with my family, go to concerts, and travel. And I'm actually hoping to travel to a concert on Monday in Mexico for a music festival, but we'll see if that happens. We're watching COVID really closely, so we'll see about that. First, congratulations on the merger with Don Johnson. I heard the news yesterday and I was super excited, and I'm sure all of you are excited as well. So, yay! Congratulations. I'm excited about the co-vision and moving forward and working with Texthelp as they now merge with Don Johnson. So we use both tools. So that's fantastic news for us in the AT world. So Minneapolis Public Schools and Read and Write, here's a timeline. I do want to make sure that people before me get credit that this process was started before I was involved, and I have sort of been taken over the process, but want to acknowledge the folks that did the work to get us here. So through 2016 through 2020, we provided Read and Write on a per student basis, generally requiring people to fill out what we call the SET framework, requesting a license and justifying that. In 2017, we added the Read and Write extension for all students in Minneapolis Public Schools. And as you know, there are some tools that remain free even after the 30-day trial. And then we provided the paid version upon request for students that needed that extra support. During distance learning, we trialed district-wide Read and Write for our entire district and collected data during that time. And some of you probably know well that the distance learning has been a real challenge, but one of the silver linings is the increased use of assistive technology and our ability now to provide materials in a way that is equitable and accessible for all of our learners. And 2020-21, we purchased a one-year district-wide license and collected data on that. And we were able to do that because our pilot was so successful. And then just this last year, just recently, we actually signed a 2-year extension to provide Read and Write to all Minneapolis Public School students. So that's where we are, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got there. I think the biggest thing that we did that was most effective is that we really aligned Read and Write with our core district priorities. And so from my perspective, I actually don't look at Read and Write first. I look at our core district priorities first and then try to find tools or ways to address those district priorities. In Minneapolis Public Schools, our 4 key priorities are literacy, social emotional learning, equity, and multi-tiered structural supports. The literacy priority was probably the easiest to tie to Read and Write. We know that Read and Write allows struggling readers to engage with core instruction among a multitude of other things. But if we just focus on that, that makes it worth it in and of itself. SEL, social emotional learning, we know that kids experience a lot of anxiety. Kids that struggle with reading experience, in particular, kids who struggle with reading experience a lot of anxiety at school. There are so many smart, brilliant kids that when given that little bit of extra support, are able to take in information at their level of intelligence and also share what they know with just a little bit of extra support. We know when they don't have that support, that negative behaviors increase and anxiety increases. And there's a really interesting study called Reducing the Tigers in the Classroom. And it's about the anxiety that struggling readers have before they enter a classroom and how we feel like providing tools for those students really reduces that anxiety. In fact, we have some concrete evidence in our district showing exactly that. And then the other big piece is equity. And in Minneapolis public schools, Minneapolis is home to where George Floyd was murdered. And equity has always been something that's important, but that has been heightened in the current environment as a result of the killing of Mr. Floyd. And so, one of our visions at the Assistive Technology Center has always been to make AT more equitable. One of the issues we've had was assistive technology in the past was disproportionately provided to kids who had advocates, kids who had parents who were familiar with the assistive technology, or had someone sort of advocating for them. What we really want is for assistive technology to be provided in a way that is much more equitable. That's where, if a kid has a need, that need is addressed in the same way, regardless of your background. And we love that we are able to now provide district-wide access to every student in Minneapolis public schools, and that addresses the equity priority in Minneapolis. And then the multi-tiered structural supports is pretty self-explanatory. Read and Write is a perfect example of a tiered support. One of our big objectives in Minneapolis public schools is really to try to do more lesson planning using the framework for universal design for learning. And this was really big in us moving forward with Read and Write, was tying it into universal design for learning, or UDL. For those that don't know, UDL is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all students. And it's really based in neuroscience. So there's some really concrete, hardcore science and research behind this. And it's divided into 3 areas: providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And I'll talk a little bit in a second about how we feel like Read and Write ties really nicely into our universal design for learning objectives, in particular with the representation, which means that information is provided to students in a variety of ways. So much lecture or reading, we want to make sure that we're tapping into the learning channels that work best for our students. So providing information in multiple ways, and we know that Read and Write is one easy way to do that. You can have the screen read to you. That's probably the best example is for kids that are auditory learners. And then another big area is multiple means of action and expression, allowing kids to express what they know in a variety of ways. And for our kids that struggle with writing but have brilliant ideas, they're always judged on their writing, and we want them to be judged more on their ideas. And we know that voice typing, voice note, those sort of features within Read and Write allow our students to express what they know in a richer and wider means. At the beginning of the school year this year, we all were brought together for a virtual welcome back led by our superintendent, Ed Graff, and his educational team, and information that they wanted the entire district to know. So every single staff member in Minneapolis was introduced to a new climate framework. And as they were discussing the climate framework, I started to think, well, this sounds a lot like universal design for learning. They're using different terminology, but it's basically the same thing. And as they started to talk about, there's a lot of stuff on individuality and how we learn different. So these are priorities around a climate framework that Minneapolis Public Schools outlined and shared with all staff. So feeling valued and respected for your whole self, meeting individual needs, nurturing strengths, supporting growth and learning, incorporating background, culture, and talents. And I think that's a big one, that Read and Write allows kids to share talents that they might not otherwise be able to share. And then sharing power between staff, families, and students. So really empowering our students, and we feel like giving them the proper tools is one great example of that. So this was information that was shared to all employees by Eric Moore, our Senior Accountability Research and Equity Officer. And as he was talking, I was texting my colleagues and saying, this sounds like UDL. And then he would say more, and I'd say, this is UDL. And we were practically screaming at the end of the presentation that we're on the same page as the district. We might be using different terminology, but we're basically saying the same thing. So what we started to think was, they're outlining their priorities. I showed the district 4 core priorities and their climate framework. That's what they want. And we think the how to get there is universal design for learning. And a big part of that is providing the tools like Read and Write for all of our students. This was information that was also shared to all Minneapolis public school staff at the beginning of the school year, and it was shared by parents. And these also really resonated with me because it's a lot about how kids learn differently, they're all unique, and it really aligns with what we're trying to say with universal design for learning, which is essentially planning and teaching lessons that incorporate variability of learners. So when parents said each student is unique in their own way, students are at different places in their learning, kids need the tools they need to excel, everybody learns at a different pace, and where can students find the resources when they need extra help? And that was from a Minneapolis public school student. So this stuff, again, really resonated with me because we want to make sure what the district is saying, what families and students are saying, aligns with what we're doing. And we feel really good about our work in the district around universal design for learning, and we've branched out beyond just sort of special education and are starting to get some traction around the district and promoting universal design for learning, which again is planning for variability of learners. And a key tool in the Minneapolis Public Schools Universal Design for Learning toolkit is Read and Write for Google. And it's pre-installed for every single student in Minneapolis Public Schools. So when they're logged in their Google Chrome account, they will have the purple puzzle icon available to them, ready to click and access the toolbar. It's actually the only Google extension that is installed for all Minneapolis Public School students. And you're all familiar with the toolbar, so I won't go too far into that. But we really tie closely the Read and Write for Google, feel like it ties closely with providing multiple means of representation and providing multiple means of action and expression, which again are our universal design for learning framework. In order to justify extending our contract with Read and Write, we collected some usage data. And I love Read and Write. I think it's a fantastic tool. But my commitment is to the students and families of Minneapolis public schools. So we have to show that it's being used. We have to show that it's working. We have to show that it's helpful if we're going to continue on that path. And so we let our numbers help make that decision. And this is just a snapshot this year of our usage, but you can look at this chart here to the left and see that we're averaging thousands of uses per day in Minneapolis public schools. So these dips are usually on the weekend. So it looks like we're, close to a couple thousand uses a day. And last year, actually, sometimes this was up in the 6 to 8 thousand. Most of you are probably aware that um, Minneapolis public schools, like lots of other schools, have had a little bit of a bumpy ride this year, and we're doing our best just to kind of keep our heads above water in some instances. And so we do hope as things level out and hopefully come a little closer back to normal, that we get our usage up even more, but it's still high enough to justify continuing district-wide license. So this is a snapshot of the tools that are used most commonly. So the speech screen reading tool is our most common, followed by word predictions, which was a little bit surprising to me, but it is a great tool, so it makes sense to me. And when we roll out something district-wide, we have to be prepared. There's going to be a lot of questions. Is there training? Is there support? Who's going to do what? So before we did all that, I created a website for just a central location where people can go and get information. And I can highlight that here. And so it just talks a little bit about what read and write is, and this was borrowed from Texthelp here, and which students we think it's appropriate for. And then here are some links, these toolbars, Patrick McGrath created this awesome thing link, which I love. And so people can click on that and learn about the tools. Here's another resource guide, reference guide for the toolbars. And here's one for the iPad. Here's a link for students and all of these videos getting started, customizing your toolbar. So I used all these Texthelp videos for our students to access. Here's a link for staff, just kind of a short overview. Orbit Note, which I'm super excited about. I know there are some new features that are going to be rolling out soon, which I'm thrilled about as well. But even how it is right now is a wonderful tool. I was just working with a teacher today, and they were blown away at the features that they had available to them. I also created this scavenger hunt to use with students the first time they use read and write. It allows them in kind of a fun way to try out some of the tools. I created a frequently asked questions page, the support page, and I'm happy to share this with anybody that would like to see it or reference any of the information on there. So we created ours unique for Minneapolis. One thing was I was like, all right, if we're gonna go district wide with this, I don't want we have 30,000 students in Minneapolis public schools. It's like, I don't know if I want everybody calling me if they have questions. So I better create this central resource that we can have. So if I anticipate that this will answer most questions, then of course I'm always happy to help if there are other things. But wanted to make sure that we had a central resource for folks. So, just to kind of summarize here, the Minneapolis Public Schools steps to success for district-wide implementation. We started with a free trial and collected data, and it was really important. We had a lot of training materials set up to roll out with the free trial. We didn't just go, hey, here's a new tool. So we did that, lots of support from our rep, which has been primarily Rachel, who's been awesome to work with and helped us with all of this stuff. We collected our usage data and user feedback. We did both looking at the hard data from Texthelp, and then also we sent out a questionnaire to our users to get feedback on that, and that was really helpful. And then we tied read and write into our literacy framework, universal design for learning initiatives, and core priorities in our district. And this is, I think, what's super important, right? I can't just go to our directors and say, hey, here's this cool tool. I love to use it. But I think if we look at, here's the literacy goals, here are the universal design for learning goals, and here are the core priorities of the district. What can help us achieve those things? Then one of the tools that became clear to me was read and write. And so tying it into what our district is wanting to do already made it an easier decision for us to continue. Like I said, we work closely with our Texthelp rep. It's great to have continued support. And then we created implementation and training materials like the website. And happy to say we are now extended for another 2 years, or I guess year and a half. And I'm super excited about it. It's such a wonderful tool. Well, I was meant to be here in person, but as you probably know, we are super short staffed right now in our school. So I am out today working as a sub. And I'm not sure where I'll be assigned. It could be anywhere. Last week I was a special ed teacher, I was a Spanish teacher, so I could be anywhere. Wherever you are, wish me luck because subbing is hard work. I'd much rather have been here in person with all of you. However, if you do have questions, I would turn it over to Rachel, who's been with us step by step and could probably answer any questions that you may have. So thank you all. We love working with Texthelp. Thanks for the good work you're doing. Excited about the merger. If there's anything I can do, Rachel can share my contact information and I can share this slideshow with her if she would like to share that out with anybody else. So thanks. Take care.